Her father was a preacher. Her father was a Congregationalist preacher in Hawarden. There we go. I put this picture up of her. There's lots of pictures of her around. Oh, yeah, have teeth. There's lots of pictures of her around. Her childhood in Hawarden went about, I think, up to about age 10 or something like that, at which time her dad took another church, went to Lamar's, so he didn't go very far. And then for the rest of his life as a pastor, for most of his life as a pastor, he went to churches all around the state of Iowa and ended up generally out east, eastern Iowa. Okay, wait a minute. This one is, I think, something collegiate. She went to Grinnell, and her father worked for Grinnell. Her father worked in Grinnell in development later in his life, and that's where she went for 3 years, and then went to some kind of art school for a year. And I think it was actually in drama or acting. Keep going. Yeah, so this is right inside the house. You know, I hope nothing got bad. Those are all her books. 8 novels, 3 volumes of short fiction, 2 anthologies of miscellaneous work, and nearly 50 short stories. If you can read, let me suggest a book or 2. It seems to me, right-hand column, help me if I'm wrong, right-hand column, keep going all the way to the end. That one is John Wood Case. I can't read it.
That's Thomas.
No, go up one. What is that?
The John Wood Case.
Yeah. If you're interested in reading her in any detail and at any length, then I would suggest that you read John Wood Case. In part, not because anybody would remember, in part because it's a story that stayed in her head very, very, very deeply and then came out in a novel. And it happened in Hawarden when a highly respected gentleman in the community, suddenly it was determined that he had been grabbing stuff out of a purse. And how the church and how the family in the community reacted to it and what they did is what that story is about. And you know, that's where she might be a little literary in the sense that it's not so much an adventure, who did it, who can catch him, as much as it was how does the family of the community react to somebody who's in that situation. Go a step up, Keith, to the gray one right in the middle. I can't read it, but I think that one is, can you read it?
Folks.
The Folks. Maybe the best Ruth Suckow story is a book called The Folks, which is actually a brick. You might think it's a book, but it isn't. It's a brick. It's like 250,000 pages. It's at least this. And had we had one in the basement, it would have sunk to the water. But it's a wonderful book about a portrait of a family. And what happens to that Iowa family as the first generation comes from Germany. She frequently writes about German people, German Americans. They come from Germany and they have nothing but they work their fannies off. It's a story you all know very well. And then what happens to the generations after that? When the opportunity for farmland decreases and they simply get tired of thinking they have to be farmers if they're going to live here. It's a wonderful book. Honestly and truly, I started out reading it and I told myself, I'm going to hate this book. I'm going to hate this book. And I'm going to hate this book. I kind of like this book. By the time I finished, I loved it. It's really, really interesting. And there's others too, but let's go on. Yeah, the church was young and this is what she says. You know, she remembers the church of her father. She's very, very dedicated to her father. Loved her father very much. Loved her father's kind of, I know I'm going to get in trouble when I use this word, but promise you won't take your chairs off after me. Loved her father's liberalism. And he was liberal in the sense that he was convinced that we would do well as a people if we would emphasize the Beatitudes as much as the Ten Commandments. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, and she got that from him, and she wrote a wonderful memoir about her father that, if you're interested, you should read sometime. And the other thing says, no social cleavages had as yet become noticeable in the community. It was more like one big family, a spirit of enterprise with everywhere present. Everybody believed in the future of the town. So Lord City was established in 1870. Our friends down here, a little ways from Alton and so forth. That's 1870 also. It's fair to say that Hawarden, I know it's got a bad reputation because of that whole save thing, but we're not going to talk about it. It's Hawarden's a little bit older, and yet as a village, it's a little younger. So when they came here, there was a lot of people who I would call, I can hardly believe it, I'm saying this in our city, Yankees. They were people from out east. They weren't people from the Netherlands, yeah? Or Luxembourgians, no. Or Low Germans from Hospers. No. These were Americans. And I'll never forget one of the first times, am I talking too long here? No. I'll never forget one of the first times I read a book of hers that she talked about when she was a little girl. When she was a little girl, well, listen, English teacher. When she was a little girl, she and her friends would take a ride out in the country and read Emerson. I don't know, Janie, you got students who?
I don't teach that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Keep going, Keith, and I'll try to stop now. Well, she's a little bit older. She says she rejected the label of being a regionalist writer. In other words, a writer who could only write about Iowa, basically, or agricultural communities. But her writing focused on people's situations and their meaning. And you're going to hear that tonight in this little Reader's Theater we're going to put on. There's a lot of goofiness, but there's some very strong seriousness there, which is very typical of Suckow. Suckow's strength was the realist and meticulous portrayal of farming folks, their stories, and their struggles, some of whom we have here in costume, as a matter of fact. Okay, keep going. I'm just about done, I think. That's her place. Keep going. This typewriter is in it, actually, as her, I could say to you, that's the typewriter she typed all these, but it's not. It's ours. Keep going. But it's in there, so if you ever go visit the house, you'll see it. She got married to a guy who was much younger when she lived in eastern Iowa, and they were very much a part of the literary Iowa community. Keep going. In a 1926 essay titled Iowa, Keith, can you read that better
She
than I can?
refers to her native state as the center of the Midwest. Quote, it combines the qualities of half a dozen states, and perhaps that is the reason why this so often seems, and more to its own people than to any others, the most undistinguished place in the world.
It sounds really sad. You shouldn't think from that she was constantly sort of, poking a sharp stick in the eye of Iowa and Iowans. That's not true. Not true at all. Her writing is always there. Always. Willa Cather tried to write about New Mexico, wrote about other places as well. Ruth Suckow just wrote about Iowa. Keep going. I think this is about it. Yeah, she loved cats, and so do I, so I had her. There, see that? And one time when I was there, I took this wonderful picture. This is perfect, right? Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tabbies. 5 of them. But I could never use it because one of them is sort of depositing some things in the phone. I don't know if you can see it from me, but I'm not going to point it out. Okay, keep going. She was a sort of jaunty self. She lived in New York for a while. She didn't always live here. Keep going. I think I got one more. This is the last one. So the bald guy in the back, I don't know if you know him, but that's okay. The guy to my left that happened to be our preacher at the time and is again today. Anybody guess who this is? Iowa's Pulitzer Prize winner. Wrote 3 novels, 4 novels. Keith, help.
Maryland Roberts.
This is Marilyn Robinson. So when she was here one day, I piled her in the car and I said, I'm going to take you out to the Ruth Suckow house. And she had never heard of Ruth Suckow. But trust me, she knows who Ruth Suckow is. I think that's it. Yep. Yep.
No, you're good.
Okay. So anyway, this Mollie we're talking about is a fun-loving traveling salesman who gets far more out of visiting people than making money. But her future is clouded by the attitudes the small town holds of what's becoming. Well, she's a wonderful personality who lives in a world where her value is undercut by traditional views of what a woman should do and should not do. And here it begins. When Mollie Schumacher drove into the yard of the Bell Farm, she thought there was no one around. It was so quiet. But the garage doors were closed, and Frank always left them open when he took out the car. She shut off the engine, but she kept sitting in the car, her hands on the warm steering wheel. She noticed how dry the September sunshine made everything look. Summer was almost over again. Mollie felt a thrust of fear. Summer, no matter how hard anyone worked, was an interlude. As soon as that first Christmas came in the air, it was different. Her parents and her siblings, Charlie and Lou, kept on living in that old-fashioned house at the edge of town where they couldn't have city water or a furnace things that everybody else had nowadays. In the summer it was pleasant enough with the flowers, but the cold spurred her ambition. When frost came, you had to decide things. It would get harder and harder to start the Ford and too cold to drive in an open car. Summer work would really be over, nearly over. These days, when she started out with the stubborn starter and heated attempts at cranking, then heard joyously the loud, steady noise of the engine, she'd jump in as quickly before she had a chance to die down, and at last was out on the open road. She had been grumbling all summer about annoyances, but she had an affection for the Ford, which brought secondhand at a sale in the country. Still, she got so mad at it sometimes she called it bad names. That old hell-fired old scat. Once she had sobbed at it. But when it was running well, and when the road stretched long and smooth, and when the fields were fresh and the sky was blue, and the engine hummed noisily and the fenders rattled, she squeezed the steering wheel with both hands and felt that she loved the old rattle trap. She was so happy that she sang. She liked to sell things, and she liked the dicker.
Yoo-hoo, mate!
Well, look who's here.
I thought you folks were all asleep.
I was lying down. I don't know. I felt that kind of bum ever since I had those teeth out. I ought to get my ironing done today, though. There's some pieces I need. But come on in, Mollie. What you standing outside for?
Wait, I want to get some things out of the car.
She had some seed corn that Henry Fuchs had given her to try out, and a bag of crab apples, a jackknife she found on the road, a few hazelnuts she had picked up, whether they were ripe, a pail of honey, spray of sumac, and a half dozen melons.
Land, you do pick up the most things. Where'd you get all that junk?
I don't know. I see things when I'm driving around, and folks just give me things. Gosh, mate, I don't know where it all comes from, but I always seem to come home with the old bus loaded.
Where'd you get the melons?
Oh, some girls back here on the road had a stand and were selling them. I always like to take something home to Lou and Charlie. Here, I want you and Frank to try one of these.
Oh, no. We'll have our own melons before long.
Oh, take this one. It's supposed to be a new kind. Go ahead, mate.
Well, but I hate to.
Now, Mollie followed me into the parlor and sat down with a luxurious sigh in the cool room shaded by pine trees. She took off her hat, wiped her face with neck until they were red. Her hair fell stiff with dust.
Look at you. You're sweating like a man.
I have to work like a man, I can tell you.
Well, ain't it awful hard work for you going around with that Ford?
Oh, well, I can do it. I came across a fellow on the road, couldn't get his car started, so I got out and I tinkered it with it for a while. I don't know just what I've done with it, but the darn thing started up the minute I nose face.
You ought to have been a man.
Mollie was big all over. And Frank always said when she helped him lift anything that her arms were as strong as his. Her reddish brown hair grew rough and thick and slightly curling. And below the dusty roots was a tiny gleam of perspiration. There were dark hairs on her upper lip and chin. Her lips were full and vital, and none had a bold outline. But her brown eyes were childlike. They had an ingenious glow in the coarse vigor of her tanned face. There was just something defenseless in their warm darkness. When she was pleased or touched, they misted over.
I expect I look like thunder now. Well, who could keep fixed up running around the country doing the things that I do?
You're all right.
Her clothes are dusty. Her blue gingham dress has big hoops of perspiration under the arms. The hem of a dark brown slip is showing at the back.
You got a smudge, though, on your neck.
Oh, well, when I get home, I'll have a good scrubbing. I start out clean, mate, but gosh, I can't keep it that way. Who can who runs a Ford? Anyway, I caught an old biddy for Lena Too-Good when I was there. In fact, she couldn't catch, and I had to chase that female devil all over the landscape.
Mate had always disapproved of Mollie for not thinking more about her clothes, although when they were off together after nuts or elderberries, she depended on Mollie to shake the trees or find a way of getting over fences. Mate herself had never learned to drive their car and had to wait to go to town until Frank would take her.
So I brought along that underwear I thought would be good for Frank. Then I got your porcelain in the other bag. I think this is the nicest thing yet I've struck for men. Look
She
here.
held up a winter weight union suit, eyeing it with proud satisfaction and discussing all its good points in detail while its pathetic legs dangled.
I don't know. Frank's never worn that kind.
Oh, best for reasons for wearing it now. I know what Frank wears. Those old clumsy two-piece things. It's not that I'm anxious to sell, mate, but I'd like Frank to try a good handy piece of goods like this and get rid of those old contraptions. I want people around here to take up new things. Yeah, new things once in a while. Now, I tell you, I'm going to leave this sample here, and as soon as it gets cold, I want Frank to try this. And, you know, if he don't like it, it's all right. I'll take it back and give it to somebody for Christmas. Or let Charlie wear it.
I don't think we ought to take your sample.
Oh, fudge. Season's ending anyway.
Did you say you brought my corselet?
You bet. I had another suit of men's summer underwear, but I sold it to a fellow I met on the road. That was a funny sale. I passed him, and I saw he was walking, so I said, "Want a ride?" And he says, "Sure." We got to talking. He told me he was a lightning insurance salesman. His car broke down, and he was walking out to see Bert Gully. He asked what I was selling him, and I told him I had the best line of men's underwear he'd ever seen. I says, "Don't you want to look at some of it?" And he says, "Sure." So I stopped the car, got out my samples, and he bought that one. It was just his size. He told me he'd get me a job selling insurance if I wanted to. And I bet I can make a go of it too.
Aren't you afraid to ask strange men like that to ride with you?
Afraid of what? Think they're gonna run away with me?
Well, they might rob you.
Oh, fudge. All they get from me.
Well, I think it's awful risky.
Oh, well, it don't bother me. I like it. Oh, anyway, I can't pass somebody walking along in the heat when I'm riding. Not as least off a fellow to offer a chance to ride if he wants it. I had a tramp one day and I took him as far as the creamery.
Weren't you scared to have him in the car?
Oh, no. He was a really nice fellow. He'd been bumming around from out of California. bugs I pick up on the road.
Well, you better stay for dinner.
Gee, I can't, mate. I gotta get on. I spent half the morning chasing that old biddy for Lena. Say, though, if you let me do a little of that ironing for
Oh,
you.
I couldn't let you do that. You've got your own work.
Oh, come on, mate. I'd be glad to do it for you. It'll give me a change. I can just as well help you out a little while I'm stopping here.
For me, there was no resisting Molly when she was determined to do something for you. Molly was soon hard at work with the electric iron in the back kitchen, and that's when Frank Bell came into the house. It was shortly before noon.
I thought I saw a car out there that didn't belong. Hey, hello, Molly, how's you?
Fine, boy. How's yourself?
You want to shake my dirty old hand?
You bet I do. Sides, yours aren't more worse than mine.
Well, us fellas that handles engines all day, we can't keep Tony, can we?
Frank, let go. You're hurting her.
No, Molly's not hurt so easy as all that. I'm working up her strength so she can crank that forward.
Well, you are not going to sit down in any of these chairs in those clothes you've got on now.
Oh, I ain't? Say, what's that melon I see out in the kitchen?
That's Molly's.
No, it isn't. I brought it for you folks. Come on, let's have a taste of it.
Now, before dinner?
Sure, mustard melon's good anytime.
I am not going to have Frank Bell sitting down here in this room and eating melons in those awful clothes.
Oh, say, I can't change my clothes every time I step in and out of the house.
He can eat outdoors. Come on, Frank, you do get treated pretty mean. I got some more in the Ford. You can come out too, mate.
They ran away from Mate's expostulations, and Molly rummaged through the miscellany in the back of the Ford until she found a nice little melon for Frank.
Here, boy, how's this?
He stood eating it happily, letting the juice drip into the road and caring nothing for his black hands.
Gosh, look at all that plunder here. Molly, do you want a bite?
Sure, I'll take a bite.
Frank went back to finish his job with the machinery, and Molly washed luxuriously in the cool, soft water at Mate's sink before going back to Mate's ironing.
Well, what about you staying with us for dinner?
I ought to, but the morning's gone anyway, so gosh, I don't know where to. Well, at least I got some of that ironing out of the way for you, mate.
Hey, Mom, glad you're staying for lunch. Tell me, is business pretty good?
Took in $15 worth last Friday.
That's so. And how much you take in today?
Well, not so much today so far. I don't know what I might do this afternoon, though. I haven't stopped very many places, kind of got stuck. Well, Lena Too Good was chasing that old biddy hen, and I stopped and caught it for her, and I don't know, I did some other things too.
Well, she ought to have given you a good order for all that.
Well, she ordered 50 cents worth, I guess. One pair of cotton stockings.
Well, that's pretty good for Lena.
Molly ate with gusto of mashed potatoes, pork, and gravy.
Well, if you can take in $15 worth in one day, I expect to go on selling union suits and stockings.
No, that's only pickup work.
You've got the car, and I should think you get all around the country here. Do a lot of business, work up a good trade. I always thought you were a good salesman, Molly.
No, it's almost over. No, sir. What I want is real work. Something that'll call out the best there is in me. Oh, it's fun to sell stuff for a while, but that's what I'm after. Something big.
Yeah, something big.
This is nothing. This is something I can do with one hand. What fun is it to make money that way? No, this isn't what I'm after.
Frank was impressed, as he always was when he talked with Molly face to face. She was a strong woman, all right, and a mighty capable one in lots of ways. About as much so as a man.
Well, what is it you want to do, Molly? More violets? Some of the violets again?
Me? Schaap, sorry. Frank thought that was the trouble with Mollie. She was always wanting to get into some fancy kind of business that nobody ever heard of, not contented with straight buying and selling. That shows she was a woman. He got rid of his respect and got back into amusement. Still, he had a little uneasy feeling that Mollie might make a go of it, one of these crazy businesses someday. You know, she could do things.
That whole Violet thing fell through.
What was the trouble? You and Artie couldn't get together. Thought you and him was all ready to go down south and make your fortune in violence.
We might have to. There's something in it for the fellow that takes a hold. No, the trouble was Art got cold feet, and the missus, I guess, got him first. Heard about the snakes down south and was afraid to go down there.
Well, what was you and Artie going to do with the violence? When you raised them, were you going to take them into town and stand up and sell them to visitors on the street corners? Say, Artie Gilbert would have made a cute little flower boy.
Pass Molly the meat, Frank. She's out of everything. You better tend to your knitting here instead of talking about violence.
Mate had always figured if Mollie had any real sense about things, she'd marry some farmer, a widower, somebody who needed a good, strong wife and be glad to have her. Mate's friends would help her look around for somebody, or else she'd have to make up her mind and settle down where she was with Louisa and Charlie and attend to things at home.
Well, I still think it's a good plan for the fellow that can work it. Tell me this, why shouldn't people raise violets as well as potatoes?
Sure, and what about those goldfish? That was quite a plan. What would become of them now? Last I heard, you were chasing old man Davis all around town trying to rent his crick from him to raise up your goldfish.
Well, now that was all.
And then once you were going to fence off half your place and go into the fur business selling skunks. You in the fur business with John Jacob Astor? Skunks. Now that would have been some kind of sweet smelling place. And talk about the slaughterhouse on summer nights. P.U.
Frank Bell, you are at the table. Act nice or leave.
That's all right, too. There's a fortune in that for the right fellow. I looked that up, and I got bulletins and reports to prove it.
All I can say is give me the pig pen.
Frank Bell! How are Louisa and Charlie getting along these days?
Oh, the same as they always do. Lou don't have a time from 5 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night to pick all the grass by hand around the trees. Charlie goes back and forth to the office.
I suppose Louisa's got lots of sewing done this summer.
Oh, yes, she's made over a lot of flour sacks into shirts and nightgowns that neither Charlie nor I will wear, and she thinks she's accomplished a lot. Yes, they're both the same as always. Everything at our house is. I may go away this winter.
Oh, where to?
To Chicago.
Chicago? What would you do there?
Well, Chicago's got room for lots of people, mate. She ain't going to the South Pole.
I'm thinking about going there. Well, I suppose you'll have a fit when you hear who. I got a letter from Dory Parker.
Dory Parker.
That's right. And what's she up to?
She's getting on well, working in a beauty parlor, and now some person she's met is going to help her to set up herself in business. She wants me to come to Chicago and go in with her. Now, I'm not crazy about that business. It always seems to me as folks ought to have something better to do than just fool with their looks. But I'd kind of like to help out for Dory.
While there was nothing absolutely definite against Dory Parker, her reputation had not been good. She had left White Oak under a cloud, rumors of her carrying on with other men at the time of her divorce. But Mollie Schumacher was about the only person who still heard from her. Dory had written sentimentally that Mollie was the only friend that she'd ever had through all her problems.
Well, judge now.
and all that. Dory might have made a few mistakes, but she was a smart woman. She knew where she was headed out more than most all women do. And that beauty parlor scheme, that sounds like it might work, Molly. I'd rather polish up folks' fingernails and, if I had a choice, I'd get needles for skunks.
I think I'll do it. If only,
If only what?
well, if it wasn't for Lou and Charlie, they needn't think they can stop me, but I don't know. If they should really feel bad about it, if I thought they couldn't get along without me.
With the quarrels that go on in that household, and Louise doing all housework anyway, and Charlie's such a mild soul. He'd get all the amusement he needed in life out of making them gimcrack birdhouses.
Well, before you start planning with Dory Parker, it would have been helpful if you thought of Mom and Dad. I don't know whether the pie's very good. I think maybe I got a little too much lard. Here, let me warm your coffee, Molly.
I ought to. Coffee upsets me, but then.
Oh, have a little more coffee, Molly. Or how about we have a little wine?
Molly's coming was a fine excuse. Nate never touched Frank's wine. He went down into the cellar, found the bottle, and came in from the kitchen with 2 miniature glasses almost slopping over with a deep red brightness that held all the warmth of the late summer and the spark of dew.
This here's my last year's grape. Time to drink it up and make some more. Well, Molly, good luck.
And they drank. Molly, in spite of all the orders she meant to take that afternoon, didn't get away from the bells when dinner was over. Frank, when he had 1 glass of wine, had to have another. And then he thought about the cigars his cousin in Chicago had sent him for his birthday, and he had to have one of those. The wine made him think about making more wine, and that made him remember the old cider press and how he'd been wondering how he could get that thing fixed up.
I forgot we had it. Father used to run it every fall. Then I don't know, guess it got out of kilter somehow and got stuck into that old shed, and I never saw it until I went out looking for something else.
Oh, yes, and you'd find plenty more things if you go through those sheds. Yeah.
Come on, finish up that cigar, Frank. Let's go out and have a look. I can just take a squint at it before I go. Maybe we can get that thing a-working.
Molly and Frank went off through the farmyard. Ground was dry, air was warm, sun was glorious gold in the blue September sky. A string of cats, old ones and half-grown, and mere little scampering kittens trailed along after Frank. He made pets of the cats and fed them.
Aw, stop and give them their milk, Frank.
He won't catch none of them.
Little villains, confound them.
You'll never get any of them, Molly. Not if they don't want you to. They're smart. Well, here's the shed where I dragged the press. I kind of gave it a looking over, but I don't know, something's out of whack. I ain't figured out what.
Molly threw away her afternoon with splendid recklessness. Her eyes sparkled, and she was warm with sunshine and happiness. She and Frank were like 2 children playing hooky from school. They tinkered with the cider press for another hour, coming in at least to the conclusion that they couldn't make it go anyway.
But I found out what was wrong with it. I'll look for a bolt when I go through town, and then you can make your cider.
I sure am grateful to you, Molly. I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time.
Oh, shoot, Frank, forget it. It wasn't what I planned to do, but I guess it was just as good as selling a few stockings. You and Mate might as just as well be enjoying some cider this winter.
Once finished with the press, Frank wanted to take her to see his melons. On the way, the old dog marched up.
Oh, hey, here's old Rastus. What's the matter with him?
I don't know. He went and hurt his paw some way.
Aw, Rastus, did the old boy go and hurt himself? That won't do.
When they reached the melon patch, Molly sat down and took the dog's swollen paw in her hands.
No matter, Molly. It'll heal up on its own.
So she made Rastus go back with them to the house, and then called for warm water, cloth, and a darning needle from Nate.
It'll heal up on its own, Molly. Don't fuss.
Paul was swollen. Sand and burrs were tangled in the coarse black fur. Here was something that called for help, something alive and more absorbing than the cider press.
It's a dreadful fuss to make over a dog. You hear him yell, Molly? You be careful now.
My land's Molly. You be careful, or he'll have your hand, sure thing.
See? Now, here's what it was. No wonder. Now, oh boy, just a minute.
Put salve on a dog.
I'm gonna wrap it up too. There, now.
So how long do you figure he'll keep that on?
The maid started into the house. Molly forgot what she'd offered.
Gosh sakes, I forgot about your dishes, didn't I? Me and Frank got going on with that old cider press. There's always so much to do, isn't that the truth? If I'd done that, I couldn't do no other things either.
Molly insisted on gathering eggs, a job maid hated and Molly loved. She went hunting through the old boxes with the hay pushed into one corner, through the folds of the harsh old robe in the ancient cutter, through the mangers in the loft. She carried the eggs in a basket into the house, through the low shafts of sunshine, and sang happily, more than a little off-key.
Well, I certainly didn't think when I stopped in here I was going to stay for supper, but guess I've done a pretty good day's work of it after all.
After supper, when she came to leave, the flow and the triumph of her visit were still upon her. She was taking more plunder, eggs, glass of fresh jelly, an old rooster and a gunny sack mysteriously moving and plunging in the back seat beside her as she said her goodbye.
Now, you keep that sample, mate. Frank, you try that suit on when the cold weather comes. You'll never wear anything else. I can guarantee you that.
We sure are grateful, Molly, for all the help you've given us.
Aw, shoot. Forget it. I think that press will run now, Frank, when you get that bolt. Put some more salve on that dog's foot. He'll get some good out of it, even if he does let most of it off.
Aren't you afraid to drive home at night?
No, I enjoy it. There's nothing I like better in this world than to get off in this old car by myself and get the wheel under my hands and go it.
Sure, you bet that's the truth. Molly ain't one of these scaredy she-males. Always think somebody's gonna run off with her.
You bet I'm not. The old guy just won't turn over,
Will
I
you
guess.
crank it for her, Frank?
No. I'll crank the old beast. I'm used to it. Give me hold that crank.
Frank would not let go. She pulled it away, cranked hard, and finally the car started.
Molly, we're so darn glad you stopped.
And we're sure grateful.
Just forget it now. If we can't do a few things for folks once in a while when we get a chance, well, what's the use? Well, I've had a fine day of it, and I'd like to know why that isn't just as good.
Sure.
You're gonna get the engine heated.
Bye, folks.
Molly started with a suddenness that almost killed the engines, and then recovered, and she went on, stuck her head out of the car, and to Mate's horror, shouted back at the dog.
Bye, boy.
For some time, the old Ford rumbled down the dusty road as Mate and Frank stood still smiling.
Well, sir, she is a great Molly. I bet she didn't do 50 cents worth of business today. She'll have to hump it when she gets to Chicago with Dory. Well, it's a good thing she's going. Although I hate to not have her come around. Charlie and Louisa, you couldn't move those two with a derrick. If town burned up, Charlie Schumacher wouldn't notice it, as long as he could go on puttering with his birdhouses.
Well, I don't know that Molly does all that much more.
Fudge, mate. She got 3 times to get up and go to her. Yes, sir, I see her going to Chicago. Those girls haven't got a thing with that old place and what little salary Charlie gets. Now's her chance. She may be left alone someday. Can't help but think that she may well have a shot at some scheme that isn't plumb crazy.
She won't go.
Why won't she? What's to stop her this time?
because I know she won't go.
Surprised me. You know, a couple times there, I thought there were some tears. You seen them too? Could have sworn. Yes, sirree. I think those tears were almost there. She is a woman, isn't she? Sure enough, she is. She's unaccountable. She can do anything for anybody but herself. Well, anyway, Mollie gets a darn good time out of it.
The last faraway cattle and hum of the old Ford was lost now in the hugeness of the evening. And the crickets took up the sound in a thin, shrill, minor chorus. That's it.
Thank you very much. So pleased that so many of you came out to hear a story about Suckow. Now, as I said, this is Jim's adaptation of one of her stories, A Great Mollie. And we've had a lot of fun doing it these few times. Mate and I have kept our distance from each other, and aptly have Mollie between us, where we like her to be. So it's been a joy. So what we thought to conclude the evening was to give you folks a chance maybe to, if you have a comment or a question about the story or about Suckow's life and writing. Among the four of us, I think we can answer most things. I think maybe some things to think about. You've only heard the story once, of course, and may not know Suckow's work well. Just keep in mind here, it's the early 20th century, and so the time when motor cars are quite new. Many people live out in the country or in small towns. We can remember these things at least through the memories of our grandparents or parents, and we see somewhat of this culture that still survives outside Orange City. And you think about those families and the farmhouses and how little we moved around and what a joy it was to have company when somebody stopped over. And the peculiar place that traveling salespeople played. And then what's I think really important about the story is we have a young woman who is a salesman, a salesperson who travels the country. And so I think Suckow knows where the drama is. Even though we may look out at the rural people of Iowa and say, well, those are sort of dull and uninteresting people. But Suckow had a really good, understanding of where drama lies. And so often, what might seem like just an ordinary day in the life of a farm couple who kind of gets along on the basis of arguing and dissatisfaction.
He's a slob.
Yeah, I like my wine, my cigars. I like a little company. And so you can see, what Suckow is playing with. And so if you have observations, comments, if you have a few questions at all, keep in mind that Mollie's at home with her two siblings and her parents, and they all seem to be kind of stay-at-homers, people who are just sort of satisfied, maybe even self-satisfied. And Mollie's got more get up and go. She wants to go out and see a lot more of the world than just where her sales calls take her, and a kind of fearlessness too. So, please, questions or comments for the group?
Did you ever go to Chicago?
I tend to think she did.
She didn't?
No, I don't think so.
I think my sense is she wanted to, but she has that pull of being committed to her family, and I think they relied on her because she was the go-getter of the bunch, and she was conscientious that way. And I think she served a valuable role in her community, not only trying to bring some new ideas, but like how she cared for the dog is kind of how she cared for people, especially like Dory and Parker. Like nobody else wanted to be her friend, but she served that role in the community, an unpaid therapist role.
Good night. She's really got into the role.
I thought way too much about Mollie.
Yeah, please.
As you dove into this story in particular, but Ruth's life as a whole, what about her, or what about this story did you fall in love with? What sort of aspects of the story did you really enjoy? Were there any things that you thought, oh, this is beautiful, I really appreciate this?
I mean, let me answer it with the story that gives you a sense of the source of the story. So, I belong to this group, Ruth Suckow, Loving Ruth Suckow Club, whatever it is. And I enjoy it, I really do. It's just a bunch of old English teachers sit around, talk shop, that's all it is. Anyway, in presenting the Suckow business at the library now, I don't know, 2 months ago or so, I was selected from Northwest Iowa to be the person to do that. And I said, okay, but what am I going to do? If any of you saw the Ruth Suckow display in the Orange City Library, it did all the biographical detail, so what am I going to do? Repeat the biographical detail? And some of my friends out there in Eastern Iowa said, well, Jim, just read some stuff from her, And I thought, well, I can always do that. And then I stumbled on this one, A Great Mollie. And the fact of the matter is, there are few words in here that are mine. Now, because the entire story is conversational, you shouldn't think, oh, that Schaap is a great writer. It's just a matter of pounding it out in the right way, Mate, Mollie. It was that easy because this, now, Chris, to go to your answer. Why did I like this story? Not only because it would work for Peter's Theater, but it's got, I would someday like to play it just so that Sarah can hold up old underwear. There's a lot of, there's wonderful comedy in this, and yet I think all of you realize that when we get to the end, then Ruth Suckow has some pretty serious things to say. And that mixture, for me anyway, of uncommon hilarity and comic cuteness, along with something that, you leave with something in your pocket and on your mind after a story like this. I think that combo, if a story can do those things, if it can entertain you, but it can also make you think, then it's doing something. And that's why I liked The Great Mollie. Does that help, Chris?
It does.
Yeah, I have to say I didn't love it the first time that I read it, because what's the plot? What's the purpose of it? I didn't really get it so much. But I think there's a gentleness about it, and the more that we've done it, and the more that I've read through my part, I kind of get the power behind the story. But I haven't read all Ruth Suckow's like these two, but I've read a few, and there's just sort of this gentle spirit of really understanding the people around her. Like, when I read country people, I felt like, oh, that seems like my husband's family from Kansas, or like there were things that I could resonate with me from being from this part of the world. So I think she's fantastic.
And
I didn't even know she said it. I'm not paying for her.
No.
And I enjoyed her serving people,
Yeah.
and I think it's shocking that she drives, because I have an aunt who went her whole life without driving a car. So I know she's a woman before her time, but yet she serves all these people. She has respect, but not so much respect because she's not a married woman, and I can resonate with that one. And but at the same time, she enjoys. She loves serving people. And and I can look around in this community yet today, and I know there are people like that who still have that servant heart, and that they enjoy just touching people's lives.
What year was it written?
I don't think I know that, but we can put it.
We put it with the card.
26.
20s?
Yeah, definitely in the 20s, but, or in that area, in the 20s, but I really don't know. Yes.
Does this sort of go in with Frederick Manfred, that kind of literature?
In the sense that, oops, I kicked this thing off.
In many respects,
Thanks.
in that Manfred was also very interested in small Midwestern communities. But I think one key difference would be that Manfred was interested more in the public life and in the life of men, where much of Suckow's stories are set in the domestic sphere among the company of women.
I think what Keith just said is absolutely right. I can give you an anecdote. At Fred's death commemoration up on the hill where he was living, you had to be invited to go. There was a lot of people there. Anyway, his son-in-law said to me, you know, my father-in-law never understood women. And I think if any of you are Manfred readers, whether you're female or male, most people would agree with that. and for Suckow, you've got exactly the opposite. Although there's nothing, you know, your character, Frank it's a fine character. He's not a rummy.
Yeah, I hammed up Frank, I think, a little more just for, the comedy. But the thing I think Suckow does different than Manfred too is subtlety versus really big themes, big drama, bears attacking frontiersmen,
Crawling and
crawling,
crawling.
She just has chickens.
battles, wars, blood.
That's enough.
And that was Fred's stock and trade, the big drama. Whereas there are Suckow stories that occur at tea time of an afternoon in a parlor, the women of the town. And if you have the patience, and if you know the society of small town, middle-aged and older women, there is drama there. There are feelings there, but nothing gets said. Not really. It's all under the surface. Multi-generations of wrongs and what people wear and whose children did what, but it's all unstated. And so you have to have an appreciation for things not, exploding and guns going off, but just in a delicate conversation that often carries as much weight as a battle.
I did smile at one of the first slides. She said there were not so many social cleavages. Isn't that an interesting word?
Yeah,
It's not the divide.
Yep, it would take a while for the divides to show themselves. By the way, with that line, you all understand that she thought the world of Hawarden, this newly established little colony of people, not frontiersmen, but Yankees. So they came with some money, they came with some prestige, they maybe came with a business or two, but this brand new community of people trying to be a community, which I always thought was really luscious and beautiful.
Any other questions?
I think very few people here tonight and in this colony of the city know much about Hawarden. I grew up here, we never went there. It was kind of like the outlet. Even though we had churches there, small ones. But we never went there. What did you talk about?
I don't know that, not being a native. On the other hand, I came along and became Northwest Iowan when I was 18, and I do remember that sense. That, I have to be careful here, but that Hawarden was almost like Cherokee. You know what I mean? Darkness.
Tell about Cherokee. What don't we know?
I think it was the safe thing.
Yeah.
So So I've spoken, written about this matter, not particular to Orange City and Hawarden. We all know the story of the stolen courthouse and papers and so forth, and Hosper's smoothing it over in Des Moines. But there's a bigger theme there, and I think it's a really valuable one when we think about immigration in the United States, then and now for that matter. So we're all from someplace else, unless we were, indigenous peoples. And if you have indigenous, people in your family, great. But the rest of us came here from somewhere. And at the period when Orange City, Hawarden, and the northwest part of Iowa, largely Iowa, was settled, people were coming, to simplify things, in two sort of general groups. One were groups of immigrants from Germany, Holland,
Luxembourg.
thank you. Northern and Western Europe primarily, were the people that came, Homestead Act, and planted towns, railroads expanded. The other major group, of course, were people who considered themselves Americans. They had been, in some cases, living in Virginia for maybe 5 or 7 generations. Now, that's a very different kind of settlement, right? It's like, well, let's go west. And they may have come with resources, as Jim suggested, but it wasn't as if they came from Pennsylvania or New York that they had money. They had the language, and they had a sense of American identity, which I think is more important than resources. And so, as you can imagine, and as what happened, the sort of natural proclivity of people to group together with like-minded people for safety and comfort, and in some cases, language. We settle with other Germans because we can, we know each other, they're family. But for a lot of the Americans, they had seen, to a greater or lesser degree, those old European conflicts played out in the East. The Revolution, of course, is the greatest example. There are plenty of other examples where ethnic communities were cloistered, cut off. The prejudice that existed against Southern Europeans, and I won't even get into the racial differences. The cacophony of American difference, right? It had been playing out in the East for generations. And for some of those American migrants, let's call them, it's like, let's go to the Midwest and start over. Let's try again at America. Let's try again at the idea.
And that's the
of
spirit
freedom.
of that quote. That's the spirit of that quote.
And Iowa is kind of undistinguished because we're kind of a little bit of everything. So it may read as a slam, but it's not. It's like Iowa is the nation, is a microcosm. Except we don't have, we have monsters. Anyway, I'm sure there's things Iowa doesn't have. Talk to somebody from New York. Anyway, the point is, that's a recipe for conflict. Here are new immigrants who want to maintain their identity, religious, linguistic, cultural, and here are migrant Americans who want to cast off all that old European difference and start over with a country of like-minded people working together under a national identity. And in a little tiny way, I think that's true for Hayward and New City. So,
Well,
that's
let
true for a lot
me
of places.
sort of close up here by just simply saying, we really thank you all for coming. We enjoy doing this. It's not like it was a labor, it's a labor of love. But we also enjoy the fact that we could sit here and talk a while about the nature of our lives and the nature of our history and how it affects us. And to the effect that a story like this opens that up, we all are blessed. We all are blessed. So thank you again for coming.
I always have to say something. Want to thank our group here. I don't know if you'd call them not ready for primetime players or ready for primetime players, but I want to thank you again. Let's give them another hand. I'd like to thank you all for attending tonight's presentation. It was interesting. I know some of us attended the book study, and this was even better than that. So, thank you. We do have, just as a reminder, we have some items in the back of the museum, or actually in front, where you can buy items like t-shirts, keychains, you name it. And these items that we're selling are for promotion of the museum and also so that we can have programs such as this. So if you have a chance, stop back there and take a look at them.
Swag,
Swag.
Swag, that sounds good, swag. We'd also like to invite you to our next Nights at the Museum presentation. That's August 13th. It's called Double Dutch. Dutch immigrants as both settlers and missionaries. Andrew Klump will discuss the connections between the vision that both built the Dutch colonies in Sioux County, but helped institute a far-reaching global missionary effort. So I think this is going to be very interesting as well. So we look forward to seeing you next month.